Welcome back to 3 Up, 3 Down. As we started off the new season with last week's episode, Alex and I are back, and we're here for the team breakdowns. It's going to be this simple. It's going to be a template for all the teams in the MLB, but this week we're starting with the AL East, and that would be the AL East champions, the New York Yankees. The New York Yankees. We're going to talk a little bit of their roster, the lineup, rotation, bullpen, some additions, a little X factor who we think is going to be a key role on this team, and where we see with our predictions with the Yankees. So, starting us off, Alex, what are you seeing with this New York Yankees roster?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk about the Yankees, you got to start with the lineup. It's ridiculous. You start off with Glaber, Judge, Rizzo, Stanton, Donaldson, Bader, and then it's seemingly a new wave of prospects coming in. You got Oswaldo Cabrera, Oswald Peraza. You have Anthony Volpe potentially cracking spring with the team. So and then on the bench, seemingly right now, not a part of the starting lineup, you have IKF, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, and DJ LeMahieu, a guy who was an all-star like 3 years ago,
former
maybe.
Batting champ.
Yeah, just an electric bat.
Absolutely.
Who currently is not slotted for a starting position. It's a loaded lineup. At the same time, I look at this lineup, and there's question marks with injuries, and I think top to bottom pretty much. Judge is somebody who we have to talk about with that. Stanton, somebody we have to talk about with that. Then Bader's been injured. You have LeMahieu, Rizzo. It's seemingly chocked full of guys who you're not confident are going to play 150 games. Mm-hmm. And I think that'll be a big thing for this team because when they're healthy, we know how dangerous they are. We'll see. I do think it's good that they've added some youth because I think this lineup needs a little juice in terms of running the bases, maybe hitting into the gaps a little bit more.
Yeah. You don't see, I think adding Harrison Bader at the deadline, obviously he was hurt coming over from St. Louis, did finally see some time in the playoffs. That's a key addition, gives you a little bit of speed. I don't think this is the fastest team in the MLB, so don't expect them to be stealing all the bases in the world. But the fact is when you are returning the MVP, the batting champ, the guy who hit 60 home runs last year, Aaron Judge, you got to feel confident in every direction. I think you hit a good point with the fact that you've got guys like DJ LeMahieu, IKF on that bench, and they're quality position guys to play shortstop and second, but they don't really crack it. And yes, this gives Aaron Boone some ability to kind of play with the lineup week in and week out, game by game. But let's look at some of the additions. Obviously, re-signing Anthony Rizzo, Aaron Judge to big deals. But they did add in the rotation, and that being former White Sox pitcher Carlos Rodon, former San Francisco Giant Carlos Rodon. He is going to be slated into that second slot in the rotation, so he's the big addition. And they also added in the bullpen as well. So, I think with these additions, kind of returning this lineup similar to what we saw last year, what do you got in terms of, we kind of know who's going to be playing infield. It should be interesting to see if Aaron Hicks kind of continues to keep that left field position. But, you kind of got Oswaldo Cabrera, like you mentioned. He's coming up, realistically going to be hopefully his first year of MLB service time. And you could see him kind of being the switch with Aaron Hicks. Besides that, I think Trevino and Higashioka will be behind the plate catching for this team. Trevino being the starter, as we kind of saw in the playoffs. But yeah, on this roster, what else is kind of catching your eye?
Yeah, there's just a lot. Rodon is probably the best signing of the offseason in my mind. Obviously, re-signing Judge I think matters more, but to me that was a little bit inevitable. I know that he was close to the Giants, but I think in terms of a player moving teams, Rodon is probably going to have the biggest impact because he gives probably the most dangerous 1-2 punch. Mm-hmm. If in the AL, maybe in baseball, it depends what you think of what they got going there. Across town with the Mets, they have a pretty good case for that 1-2 punch as well. I think this rotation is awesome. It's a shame that they lost Frankie Montas for the year before the season even got started because you could have been looking at a 5-man deep rotation with all-star potential. And I think Frankie Montas has been an all-star too, so 5 guys who have been to all-star games.
I agree with that.
And they're still in their prime. They're still in good years. It's not like they're washed up at this point. Still, Domingo Germán looking like he's going to win that starting role. I think somebody else is in the running. I forget who, but Yeah, the rotation's stacked. The bullpen, it was really good last year, and they had obviously a Clay Holmes breakout. Michael King had a great year. I like this bullpen, but it's a lot of let's see it again. Aroldis Chapman isn't there, and I know he hasn't had a great stretch of performances the last couple of years, but it's still like just a dominating presence that they've had in that bullpen. And Clay Holmes is going into the year as the guy. So let's see how he performs. I have no reason to expect him not to be great again, but it's about showing it again. One breakout a year as a reliever is always a question mark.
Yep.
Until you become one of those established closers, it's really hard to trust relievers on a year-to-year basis. The Yankees seemingly developed them well, so I like what this roster is looking like. I mean,
Without a doubt. I talked to a Yankees buddy of mine who follows this team closely. His big outlook on the team was kind of seeing what does happen with Glaber, with IKF, LeMahieu, Donaldson. I got to say, I think Donaldson is this biggest weakness on this roster. If he has a bounce-back year and can be consistent like he was once that MVP in Toronto, that would be a huge addition for this Yankees lineup. But I think at this point,
he's not going to be.
He's not going to be. Exactly. Looking at an X factor for this lineup, I think we've talked about him a little bit. I think the fact that they were finally able to add a second ace to this rotation in Carlos Rodon, I see him as this big X factor. If he is able to lock down consistently in that second spot and then kind of throw that into the playoffs, a little 1-2-3 between Cole, Rodon, and Nestor would be a lockout pitching rotation. I think that's a top three that competes with almost anyone in the league.
Yeah, I like the pick. I think to me, Rodon's X factor comes in two questions. First, how many innings does he pitch this year? I think he's kind of starting to shed the label of injury prone because a lot of that was just to start his career. And he's been pretty healthy the last 2 years, but it's still there. So how many innings does he pitch? And then what does he do in the playoffs? I think that is just a massive thing because he's been in the playoffs with the White Sox and he pitched okay, but he still kind of got hit around by the Astros.
I think he gave up at least 3.
Yeah, and he pitched okay, but what's he going to do in New York?
Innings.
The light's going to be bright, and is he going to come through? Because realistically, they are paying him for those playoff starts.
They are. I mean, I think that was the big addressment from the Yankees front office. Yeah. They needed to find another starter that could go for game 3 or 2.
He can have an okay regular season, and if he comes to play in the playoffs, it's a great contract and it's worth it. So I like that pick. I think anytime you can add an elite starter for a relatively cheap cost with what the market is, partially because of the injury history, I like the move by the Yankees. It'll come down to the playoffs for how this contract is looked at in the future.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. Who is Rodon your X factor as well? Who are you picking?
No, I went with a little different one, and this is because we talked about this lineup and the bench, and like LeMahieu's on the bench right now. It's seemingly a shuffle that's going to have to happen with these players. You can't keep LeMahieu's not a bench player. Mm-hmm. So how are you going to rotate that infield? How are you going to rotate the DH spot when you have Giancarlo playing there? Is he going to play a little more outfield? Who knows? But my X factor, a guy who's been in a lot of trade rumors for like 2-3 years now, Gleyber Torres. Starting second baseman penciled in right now, but again, LeMahieu's a guy who can slide right into that role. I think Gleyber is a guy who's coming off 48 homers, but it's 4 years since that, right? I don't think he has 30 since he hit 48. In the last 3 years, he's had like 5, 8, and like 25 maybe last year.
Yep.
What do they do with him? I know we're White Sox fans, so a big rumor in the offseason, we had a second base hole, was potentially a Liam Hendricks for Gleyber Torres trade. That's the kind of value he has, whether he warrants that or not. He's a pretty controversial player because he did hit 48 homers, but he's also been underwhelming the last couple of years. What do they do with him? I think he is a trade piece because I think they can replace him in the short term with LeMahieu. And I think they look at Oswald Cabrera or Oswald Peraza.
Whatever he goes by
there's Oswald Peraza and Oswaldo. So Oswald and Oswaldo. I think both those guys can play second and potentially be a replacement.
And you still have IKF.
You have IKF. You have Anthony Volpe, who's a guy they're going to want to get in the roster. I just don't really see how Gleyber stays on this team if they're playing well.
I get it. Well, to wrap it up on the New York Yankees, where are we predicting the Yankees? Alex, where do you see this Yankees team falling at the end of the year?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go with second in the AL East.
Okay.
And the reason for this is I think if they stay healthy the whole year, I think they're going to be really hard to beat over a whole season. I think they just have too much power, too much pitching. I don't have faith in it. I think people have a little recency bias. in terms of last year, where there was decent health on that team. And Yankees fans may be upset because I know when your own team's injured, you value it more. But Judge played a full year.
Yep. First time in a long time.
I hope he does for the sake of Judge in baseball. I don't like the Yankees, but I like Judge, and I want him to play a whole season. I think it's a tough bet to expect him to play 150 games.
I would agree.
If he does, I think this team probably wins the division. I'm not going to count on that, and I hope I'm wrong in terms of him at least playing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to go second in the AL East. Too many injury risks, kind of an aging roster. I think they've added a little athleticism. And if like Volpe or Oswaldo Cabrera. We're going to work on that. It's a lot of names there. But if any of those three guys have a big season, I mean, we're talking about like just another difference maker in there. So I think they're going to be a popular pick to win the AL East. I'm going to go second because I'm still concerned about the health.
I like the pick. I think you got to look at and see what teams around the division did. We will obviously discuss them more in our AL East divisional breakdown. I think they're able to edge out the Blue Jays. I don't see it being a powerful season for the Yankees like we saw in last year. But I got the Yankees finishing first in the AL East, beating out the Blue Jays with a powerful 1-2-3 punch of that rotation. That wraps up our New York Yankees breakdown.